Well, can we save our kids from smartphones? That was an article in the Wall Street Journal that Father David Ross read, and he's joining us today. We're going to talk more about this, and thanks for joining us, Father.
Good afternoon, Holly. I find this article so interesting. Peggy Noonan writes a column each weekend for the Wall Street Journal. She writes it on Friday. It's entitled Declarations. And she came across a book that enchanted her. It really fascinated her. It's entitled The Anxious Generation, How the Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic in Mental Illness. It's written by Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist. He teaches at the University of New York, and he's quite bright. He was the one who years ago came up with the idea of confirmation bias, which means that we tend to associate with people who will confirm our own biases, who think the way we do. But this book is a good insight into what's happening with smartphones in the country. Peggy Noonan says that what happens oftentimes is we all know this to be the case, but until somebody articulates it and writes about it, then it confirms our suspicions. So she writes about the fact that what's happening in our country is sort of disastrous when it comes to our youth. There seems to be a mental health crisis among the young, and we all know that. They seem to be addicted to gaming and social media. And she says, the things that brought this about for Generation Z were the arrival of the smartphone. The second thing was the continuing spread of broadband internet. And thirdly, is starting in 2009, the new age of hyper-visualized social media. So retweets and shares and all those things like that. 79% of teens own a smartphone, 79%. And 28% of kids between 8 and 12 have them. And soon teens reporting that they spend an average of almost 7 hours a day on their screens, and 1 out of every 4 teens said that they were online constantly. Can you imagine this? 1 out of every 4 said they were online constantly. So suddenly children spend far less time playing, talking to or touching each other, making eye contact with their friends and their families. And so Haidt says, or Peggy Noonan observes, that they withdrew from what she referred to as embodied social behaviors, which are essential for youth's developing. Between 2010 and 2024, major depression among teens went up 145% for girls and 161% for boys. So what we're finding is this. Mr. Haidt says, he calls it the great rewiring. He says parents over the course of time in the past decade or two have found that they'd rather have their kids stay at home playing on their iPhones than being out among society where there are predators and things like that. And they want to keep their kids safe. But the irony is this. Parents are often physically overprotective of their kids out of the fear of those sexual predators. But those predators, as we all know, have moved online, haven't they?
Yeah, I love that point. I thought that was such an awesome point in the article, that we try to protect them, but we're not doing it when we let them on the smartphones that long.
Absolutely. Yeah. And these predators find all kinds of contact with kids. It's unbelievable. So one girl writes in an essay for Free Press, I was 10 years old when I watched porn for the first time. I found myself on Pornhub, which I stumbled across by accident and returned out of curiosity. Unbelievable, some of this stuff. Right. So Mr. Haidt suggests 4 reforms, and I'd like to see those in our schools especially. No smartphones before high school, only basic phones with no internet capability. Secondly, no social media before 16. Let their brains develop first. Thirdly, all schools from elementary through high school should be phone-free zones. Students can store those devices in their lockers. This is going to be a hard one to pull off now, since you've already established it in our schools, haven't we? Yeah. But then he talks about this, and I think it's important. Bring back unsupervised play. Only that way will kids naturally develop social skills and become self-governing. When I was a kid, my mother was happiest on Saturday morning when I made a bologna sandwich, put it in a plastic or paper bag. We didn't have plastic bags back then. And we would take our bikes, a group of us boys, and we'd go out north of town to Twin Lakes or something like that. Or we'd drive all over. And my mother was so happy we didn't come home till supper.
Right.
She was thrilled because she could sleep or she had to clean the house or something like that. Today, kids spend their day in the house, don't they?
Yeah.
So Mr. Haidt's observations, I think, are something pertinent for the times in which we're living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree that some of those reforms that he mentioned would be awesome, to take them out of schools. And I mean, why does a kid need a phone when they're that young? Just to call up and say, hey, pick me up or whatever. You don't need the social media part on it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when you think about the fact that they're isolating themselves more and more, they think that they're connecting more and more with people, but the social skills are just, they're not being developed today, I think.
Right, yeah. I think it's really great that you brought up this article, Father David Ross, because I agree with it. And I think it's just that most parents in school districts are trying to do this.
I think so. In fact, some school districts are saying that we're not going to be able to have smartphones in the schools again. So
Well, we'll see what happens, huh? All right.
thanks
Well,
much.
Father, thanks for joining us today.
All right, Holly. Talk to you later.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Don't go away. New Edition continues in a moment.